It all began in the small town of Wickford, Essex, England. It was there, on December 2, 1996, that a girl named Grace was born into the family of Gillian and David Millane. It seemed like nothing special, a typical family with two sons, Michael and Declan, in addition to the newborn. The father, a construction businessman, earned a decent income, so the family never experienced any financial hardship. But you know, sometimes the most terrifying secrets can lurk behind an idyllic facade. Secrets that can unsettle even a seasoned detective like myself. And in this story, Grace's happy childhood turned into a real nightmare. All because of Tinder, that infamous dating app. Usually, when people talk about Tinder, they think of romantic stories or amusing dating situations. But believe me, in my line of work, I've encountered cases where online dating led to tragic and even fatal consequences. And that's exactly the misfortune that befell young Grace Millane. What started as a casual flirtation on a popular app turned into a true horror for the girl. She found herself face to face with a real monster, a person who had no regard for human life. And the most terrifying part is that Grace had no idea about any of this until the very end. This girl, who seemingly had everything, loving parents, brothers, a carefree childhood and youth, fell victim to an insidious crime. And all because she put her trust in the wrong person. The girl successfully graduated from Sandringham College and earned a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing in 2018. But her ambitions didn't end there. Grace dreamed of travel, adventure, and new experiences. And importantly, she didn't just dream, she actively pursued her desires. Thanks to her hard work and ability to balance work and study, Grace managed to save up a considerable sum of money. Enough to travel the world for an entire year after graduation. Her family and friends weren't surprised by the girl's decision. They knew her as a freedom-loving, brave, and independent person who sought out new experiences. And indeed, it seemed that endless possibilities lay before Grace. Her education, the support of a loving family, her own savings, all of this allowed her to fulfill her dream and see the world. And later, perhaps, achieve success in her dream profession of archaeology. But before setting off on her adventure, Grace did one more thing that speaks volumes about her character. The girl cut off her luxurious long hair and donated it to a charity that makes wigs for children undergoing chemotherapy. To some, this may seem like a small gesture, but to me, as a police officer who has seen many human fates, it's a testament to Grace's sincerity, kindness, and compassion. Just imagine, a young girl, full of dreams and hopes, unhesitatingly sacrificing a part of herself to bring joy to seriously ill children. Aren't these the kind of people we should value and protect? Unfortunately, as this tragic story shows, even the best of us are not immune to the treachery and cruelty of this world. And so, after bidding farewell to her family, Grace set off on her dream trip around the world. Her first stop was distant and mysterious Peru. For a month and a half, the girl explored this amazing country, getting to know its culture and nature, photographing picturesque landscapes, and making new acquaintances. But Grace had no intention of stopping there. A true round-the-world journey means constantly moving, discovering new horizons. And so, on November 20, the girl headed to the next destination on her trip, New Zealand. Grace spent the first 10 days on the North Island, and then, on November 30, arrived in Auckland. The girl immersed herself in a whirlwind of new impressions, attending exhibitions, going on excursions, getting to know the local culture and traditions. She had no idea that fate had allotted her so little time in this wonderful city. Only 5 days separated Grace from the terrible tragedy that would forever change the lives of her loved ones. So, what happened in Auckland? Who crossed paths with this young, kind, and sincere girl? And why was her life cut short so suddenly and brutally? December 1 arrived, the day before Grace's birthday. The girl, as always, was eager to make new acquaintances and gain new experiences. She actively used social networks and dating apps, particularly Tinder. It would seem, what could be dangerous about wanting to meet new people while traveling? But as practice shows, sometimes such openness and trusting nature can play a cruel trick on us. It was through Tinder that Grace met Jesse Kempson, a resident of Auckland. At first, the girl didn't show much enthusiasm in communicating with him, responding in a reserved and cold manner. But Jesse, it seems, was not about to give up so easily. He was persistent, trying to get Grace's attention. Perhaps if the girl had listened to her intuition, if she hadn't given in due to a lack of other plans. But at that moment, Grace probably thought that no harm would come from agreeing to meet up. Just to have a cocktail, get to know each other better. She agreed to meet Jesse in the city centre, at the Sky City Entertainment Complex. The couple met, hugged a bit awkwardly, as often happens on a first date. Then they headed to Andy's Burgers to have a cocktail and chat in a more relaxed setting. At first, the conversation didn't flow. There was a certain tension. But gradually, the young people loosened up and began to communicate more freely. Events developed rapidly from there. Grace and Jesse went to a Mexican restaurant, where the guy, apparently deciding to impress the girl, ordered 2 pitchers of margaritas and 1 of sangria right away. The alcohol did its job. The conversation became more uninhibited and casual. Some time later, the couple was already sitting in a bar, sipping beer, laughing and kissing. From the outside, they might have looked like 2 lovers enjoying each other's company. Nothing foreshadowed the impending tragedy. At one point, Jesse briefly stepped away to the restroom, and Grace, in high spirits, sent a message to her friend. The girl shared her impressions of the date, saying that her new acquaintance worked as a deputy director of an oil company and was planning to move to London in the near future. Grace was full of hope that this acquaintance would grow into something more, that they would be able to maintain a friendship when she returned home from her trip. Oh, how cruelly first impressions can deceive us sometimes. If only Grace knew how this seemingly innocent encounter would turn out for her. If only she could have foreseen that the charming stranger from Tinder would turn out to be someone completely different from who he claimed to be. That beneath the mask of a successful and attractive man lurked a cruel and insidious criminal. But unfortunately, life is not a detective novel where an experienced investigator solves all the mysteries in time and saves the victim from inevitable doom. In reality, everything is much more complicated and tragic. And innocent, trusting girls like Grace often become easy prey for predators in human form. The evening of December 1 was drawing to a close. Grace rejoiced in her new acquaintance, made plans, dreamed. She did not yet know that these dreams would never come true, that her life would be cut short so suddenly and brutally, and that her ruthless murderer would turn out to be the very man with whom she had so recently carelessly drank cocktails and kissed in a bar. Continuing the story of Grace and Jesse, it should be noted that their evening at the bar was smoothly transitioning into something more. The young people, inflamed by alcohol and passion, were already openly discussing plans for celebrating Grace's upcoming birthday. The girl, it seems, had completely lost her vigilance and caution, trusting a man she barely knew. As surveillance camera footage would later show, around midnight, Jesse and Grace, tightly embracing, left the bar and headed to the motel where the guy was staying. This small detail, a room in a cheap motel, not an apartment or hotel suite, should have alerted Grace, made her think about Jesse's true nature. But apparently, at that moment, the girl was too caught up in the prospect of a romantic continuation of the evening to pay attention to such trifles. The cameras recorded the couple, not letting go of each other's embrace, entering the motel through the main entrance, and then taking the elevator to the desired floor. And that was the last moment Grace Millane was seen alive. She no longer made contact, showed no signs of life. The message sent to her friend from the bar was her last communication with family and friends. Just imagine what Grace's parents and friends felt when, the next day, December 2, dozens of messages and calls with birthday greetings started pouring in on her phone. The girl was usually always in touch, especially with her family. But now complete silence, the phone turned off. It was so uncharacteristic of Grace that her loved ones immediately sounded the alarm. They sensed that something had happened, something terrible and irreparable. But no one could have imagined then that behind this alarming silence was a cold-blooded murder committed by a guy the girl had just met on Tinder. It seemed that nothing in Jesse Kempson's past foreshadowed such a chilling finale. As it turned out, Jesse was born and raised in Wellington, on New Zealand's North Island. His childhood can hardly be called cloudless. His parents divorced when the boy was 9, and his mother soon left the country for good. But overall, Jesse grew up like most of his peers without any obvious deviations or abnormalities. The first alarming signs appeared later, in 2013, when 21-year-old Jesse left his father's house with a scandal. The reason was constant quarrels and accusations of theft against the young man. Then he went to Australia in search of a better life, but things didn't work out there. Either he had to make do with odd jobs. Eventually, in 2018, Jesse returned to Auckland. But even here, he could not find stability and peace of mind. At first, he rented a room, lived with roommates, but quickly ruined relations with them due to his lifestyle and unrestrained aggression. Who would want to tolerate such an unpredictable and dangerous guy at home? In the end, Jesse settled in a cheap motel, a place that became merely a backdrop for his further crimes. So, what do we have? A lonely man with a troubled past, without a steady job or reliable housing, a person prone to aggression and unlawful actions. A classic portrait of a potential criminal, if only there had been an opportunity to see all the warning signs in time. But who could have thought that a casual acquaintance through Tinder would turn into a bloody drama? That an ordinary date would be the beginning of a carefully planned murder. Jesse Kempson was a true master of deception. He easily created an illusion of a successful and interesting life around himself, disregarding the truth. In his fabrications, he appeared as a rugby star, an enviable playboy, an influential director of an oil company. But can this really surprise an experienced investigator? Believe me, I've heard so many similar tales from detainees that I've lost count. But the most disgusting thing is that Jesse did not shy away even from such serious matters as illness and death of loved ones. Just imagine he claimed to be terminally ill with cancer, that his parents had died. What kind of person must one be to so shamelessly defile the memory of family members for the sake of manipulation and self-pity? But reality, as is usually the case, turned out to be far from the golden dream Jesse painted. In fact, the guy was barely making ends meet, constantly changing jobs and housing. He was kicked out from everywhere rented apartments, positions as a bartender, salesman, sales manager. The last dismissal, by the way, happened on the very day he met Grace. A dubious coincidence, don't you think? And so, this loser, this man with no future, crosses paths with a young, promising girl who has every chance for a happy and fulfilling life. He, like a black hole, drags her into his gloomy world, destroys her aspirations, negates her achievements and dreams, and ultimately commits the most serious crime possible: murder. On the night of December 1, on the eve of Grace's birthday, in the cramped room of a cheap motel in Auckland, a bloody massacre took place. Jesse Kempson, lonely and embittered at the whole world, went too far in his criminal game. He took the life of an innocent girl who had the misfortune to believe his sweet promises and respond to his courtship on Tinder. A detailed chronology of events, reconstructed from surveillance camera footage, testifies to the cold-blooded and deliberate nature of the crime. Judge for yourself. At 8 a.m., Jesse, as if nothing had happened, calmly left his room, and just a few minutes later, at 8:07, he was recorded in the nearest store, where he purchased a large suitcase. Why, you may ask? The answer is as obvious as it is chilling to hide the body of his victim. But Jesse's perverted fantasies did not end there. At 8:32, he went shopping again, this time to a supermarket. On his shopping list were bleach, gloves, and cleaning supplies. A classic set for a novice killer, wouldn't you say? Although, I must admit, even I, a seasoned cop, am struck by such brazen self-confidence and methodical action. But the most amazing thing is what happened next. It would seem that with a fresh corpse on his hands, any normal person would only think about how to get rid of the body and traces of the crime as quickly as possible. But not Jesse. This incredible scumbag, at 10:33, as if nothing had happened, went out into the city again. He got into a taxi, although the cameras clearly recorded how nervous he was. Perhaps it's not noticeable to the ordinary eye, but trust my experience in my life. I've seen so many liars and villains that I can recognize from a distance when a person has something to hide. And what did he do next, our ladies' man Jesse? Why, he decided to have some fun. Instead of hastily covering his tracks, this hapless Casanova went on a date with another Tinder victim. What kind of audacity and arrogance must one have to think that he can get away with it? That he can simply go on living as if nothing had happened? But as we know, even the most cunning criminal will sooner or later make a fatal mistake. And Jesse is no exception. Despite all his attempts to hide in the bustle of the big city, surveillance cameras relentlessly recorded his every move in the days after Grace's disappearance. Here he is, at 7:30, driving a rented red Toyota to the motel. He gets out, drags some bulky object into room 828, a vacuum cleaner, as it later turned out. Why, you ask? Take a closer look. Jesse is trying to clean the bloodstains off the carpet, and it's not hard to guess where those stains came from. Half an hour later, movement again. Kempson carries out the vacuum cleaner, loads it into the trunk, and then, at 9:30, he appears with suitcases, barely dragging them as if something heavy is inside. Doesn't this seem suspicious to you? After all, there's a bloody mess left in the room. Here he makes another mistake. He goes to Cumu, a quiet suburb, instead of getting lost in the depths of the metropolis. And there, in a small store, he buys a shovel. Guess why a criminal needs a shovel in the middle of nowhere? That's right, to dig a hole and hide the body. So, the investigation into the murder of Grace Millane was gradually gaining momentum. Jesse Kempson apparently considered himself devilishly cunning and cautious. Having disposed of the body, he diligently covered his tracks, returned the rented Toyota to the dealership, having thoroughly washed it at a car wash beforehand. He didn't forget about his victim's belongings, either threw them in a dumpster far from the crime scene. He probably thought it was the perfect murder, that no one would ever find out about his monstrous deed. But he was fatally mistaken. 4 days after Grace's disappearance, the police were already on the suspect's trail. Footage from the Sky City cameras, where the victim and the killer's last date took place, became the starting point of the investigation. Soon, operatives were already walking the corridors of the cheap motel, questioning the staff, looking for any leads. The culmination of this hunt took place in the motel lobby. It was there that the detectives came face to face with Jesse Kempson, who was casually returning from another trip to the store. The criminal immediately sensed something was wrong, tried to escape. But no way, the professionals quickly caught up with him and apprehended him. The last doubts were dispelled. Jesse had been under covert surveillance and was exposed. From there, everything unfolded swiftly and relentlessly, like in a well-rehearsed play. Kempson was taken to the police station, and the interrogations began. At the same time, forensic experts combed through the motel room in search of evidence, and they found traces of blood, carefully washed away but ruthlessly exposed with luminol. This discovery became the final nail in Jesse's coffin. During the interrogation, the cornered beast was at a dead end. The investigators press him, asking uncomfortable questions. Kempson is nervous, gets confused in his testimony, contradicts himself. And all the while, the evidence is relentlessly tightening the noose around his neck. Finally, unable to withstand the psychological pressure, Jesse confesses. Yes, it was he who met with Grace that fateful night. It was he who lured the girl to his room. It was he who committed the terrible and senseless murder. But why? What pushed him to this horrific act? Kempson never gave a clear answer to these questions. And here is the finale of this chilling story. The life of young, promising Grace Millane was cut short so tragically and unjustly. She fell victim to a vile, petty scoundrel for whom someone else's existence was merely a bargaining chip in his dirty games. For me, an old police officer who's seen all sorts of things, it's hard to hold back emotions. Just imagine the last minutes of this girl, all the horror, pain, despair from the realization that her life was cut short in its prime, thousands of miles from home, at the hands of a despicable coward. The only thing left of Grace is her Instagram account, filled with bright, cheerful photos. And the last post, a mystical drawing of a skull, like an ominous premonition, a hint of fate. But how could this young, trusting girl expect that her tragic finale was already written in advance? I can't help but think how many more of them are out there, such Graces. Young, defenseless against the treachery of this world. How many fates are ruined? How many dreams are shattered by those who should have been protecting and guarding them? You know what strikes me the most in this story? The courage and wisdom of Grace's father. In his address to the public, he urged people not to despair, not to let fear control our actions. Because if we give in to panic and shut ourselves off, evil will gain yet another small victory. And although nothing will bring Grace back, her family continues the fight. They support the White Ribbon charity, which helps women who have suffered at the hands of men. In this, I see a higher justice and meaning not to let the tragedy break us, but on the contrary, to draw strength from it to move forward and change the world for the better. And as long as there are such people, I believe that good will surely prevail. Well, dear viewers, this chilling and instructive story has come to an end. The Grace Millane case is not just a criminal chronicle, it's a warning to us all. A warning that evil can lurk anywhere, that even the most innocent thing, like online dating, can turn into a tragedy. But let's not forget the main thing: Grace was an amazing, bright girl, full of dreams and hopes. Her life should not have been cut short so early and so brutally. And although the guilty one has been punished, it will not bring Grace back or heal the wounds of her loved ones. However, even in this grim story, there is a glimmer of light. The courage and resilience of the Millane family in the face of incredible grief is admirable. The way they continue the fight, supporting charity and drawing attention to the problem of violence, inspires hope. So I urge you, friends, not to be indifferent. If this story touched you or made you think, share it with others. Leave a like, write a comment with your thoughts, because only by joint efforts can we make our world a little safer and kinder. And that's it for now. Thank you for being with me, for listening to this difficult story to the end. This has been Detective Brooks, and I hope that we will meet more than once in my future investigations. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And remember, evil is afraid of light, which means each of us can become that light. Until we meet again. Taylor Palmer, a 12-year-old girl, had her whole life ahead of her, but unfortunately, she met a terrible fate. Being an ordinary teenager, she became a victim of inhuman violence. Taylor's mother, sensing a serious threat to her daughter's life from her tyrant husband, placed her under the care of the Child Protection Center. The woman hoped this decision would keep the girl out of danger and give her a chance for a better future. However, as it later turned out, the mother's good intentions only worsened the situation for young Tia, as Taylor was affectionately called by her loved ones, and soon a horrific tragedy occurred. Under pressure from her tyrant husband, Cindy, Taylor's birth mother, was forced to hand her daughter over to the Child Protection System. She sincerely believed she was doing the right thing, as circumstances required saving the child. The woman, herself a victim of domestic violence, sought to protect her daughter from a similar fate. Due to the lack of opportunity to properly raise the girl in strained family relationships, Taylor grew up to be a troubled child. She often ran away from home to avoid conflicts between her parents and had a propensity for vagrancy. In January 2015, by decision of the Child Protection Center, 12-year-old Taylor was sent to a wonderful family living in the town of Chambers Flat, about a 40-minute drive from Brisbane, Australia. It was a quiet and cozy town with a population of around 500 people. The Thornburns became the foster family for the girl, a household consisting of the head of the family, Rick, his wife Julie, and their 2 sons. The elder John, 19 years old, and the younger Trent, 18 years old. By that time, Taylor had already managed to change several foster families. For one reason or another, new families did not suit her due to the girl's difficult character. Some considered Taylor quite a conflicted personality. The Thornburn family was no exception. Young Taylor was dissatisfied with the prospect of living with 2 teenage boys much older than her. However, she had no choice. Taylor's new foster parents, Rick and Julie, had been married for over 25 years at the time. Rick, a former truck driver, had to switch to lighter vehicles due to a serious back injury. This led him to start his own business selling fast food from a van, and he also owned a horse farm. Julie, his wife, opened a home daycare. Throughout the district, the Thornburn family had a reputation as a decent, respected, and exemplary family, so the Child Protection Services chose them as a foster family for Taylor. For 4 months, it seemed that the girl had settled well into her new family and continued to live there until the tragic events that followed. Taylor attended Morrison State High School, located just a 20-minute drive from the Thornburn home. Outwardly, life seemed to be getting better. Everyone got used to Taylor, and she seemed to get along with her new household members. But as it turned out, not everything was as cloudless as it might have seemed at first glance. The morning of October 30, 2015 seemed ordinary for the Thornburn family. Rick, as usual, drove his foster daughter Taylor to school and returned home to repair his car. But just a few hours later, a disturbing call came from the school. Taylor had not shown up for classes. For the girl, this was not the first time she had run away. With a difficult childhood behind her, she was used to escaping her problems in this way. However, this time, unlike previous instances when Taylor would quickly return on her own or be found, the girl vanished without a trace. In desperation, Rick posted on social media, describing the situation and begging anyone who might know Taylor's whereabouts to come forward. Unfortunately, his plea went unanswered. The girl's foster family knew that Taylor was eagerly awaiting Halloween and had even prepared a costume, so her disappearance on the eve of the holiday seemed more than strange. Eventually, they decided to contact the police, and soon the teenager was declared missing. However, no serious search was conducted, as everyone assumed the girl would soon return after another runaway attempt. A little less than a week had passed since the foster child disappeared. Suddenly, early in the morning on November 5, 2015, a chilling call came to the police. A local fisherman who contacted the emergency services reported a horrifying discovery. He had stumbled upon a body in the yellowed reeds in the shallow waters of the Pimpama River. The location where the remains were found was approximately 30 kilometers south of where Taylor was last seen alive a week earlier. During this time, the body had undergone significant decomposition, likely aided by both the local fauna and the region's specific climatic conditions. The police officers who arrived at the scene of the terrible find could not even confidently determine the sex of the deceased person, let alone establish their identity. Only after a thorough examination did they suggest that it was the body of a teenager. The condition of the remains was horrific. The body, except for underwear, had no clothing on it. The remains were immediately sent for an autopsy and forensic examination. Comparing details about missing persons in the area, the police assumed that the deceased could be 12-year-old Taylor Palmer, who had disappeared about a week earlier. Later, this assumption was confirmed by the results of a DNA analysis conducted in the laboratory, and the worst fears of law enforcement came true. During a thorough examination of the body, experts concluded that the terrible injuries, initially mistaken for animal bite marks, were most likely inflicted by a person. It became clear that the girl had become a victim of brutal violence. The case was immediately reclassified as a murder, and an investigation began. Considering the fact that Rick Thornburn was the last person who likely saw Taylor alive, investigators began the inquiry by talking to him. From the very beginning, Rick aroused suspicion with his strange behavior and inconsistencies in his statements. However, all of this had yet to be thoroughly checked and proven. It was also decided to question other members of the girl's foster family, as perhaps one of them had more information. Unfortunately, interrogations of family members yielded no useful information. Everyone, as one, confirmed the words of the head of the family that he had taken Taylor to school at 7:50 a.m., and no one had seen the missing girl since. After that, the investigators went to the school to confirm the family's testimony, and it was there that they managed to obtain more valuable information. The detectives spoke with all the 7th grade students in Taylor's class, her friends and teachers. Over 100 people were interviewed in total. It turned out that absolutely no one had seen her that day when she was going to class, or even near the school. After examining the surveillance camera footage from outside and inside the school on the day of the girl's disappearance, the detectives became convinced that Taylor had not come to school and had not been spotted near the entrance, which was strange. Where then could the girl have gone? However, there were female students, Taylor's friends, who claimed that their classmate had serious problems at home. One of them said that Taylor had begged her to take her home because her foster parents were treating her badly, and she was in for big trouble with them. But the friend, due to her young age, could not make such decisions for her family and bring Taylor home, and she didn't think it was that bad. But soon after, Taylor died a terrible death. This happened literally a week before the girl's disappearance. The friend believed that these events could be related. However, Taylor did not specify to her exactly what the foster family was doing to her. After talking to other students, the police concluded that Taylor had no enemies and no one else would have harmed her. Suspicions about the foster family intensified, and investigators continued to check the Thornburns. But the foster family members categorically denied all accusations of domestic violence against them and claimed that Taylor was making everything up. As in the case of previous families from which she had run away and also complained about them, the police verified this information and found that Taylor was indeed prone to running away and was a difficult teenager. All the people close to the family, as well as neighbors, claimed that this was an exemplary family. Many took their children to their home for a private daycare, and no one believed that such decent people could have done anything to Taylor. Everyone thought she had simply run away, invented a story about being mistreated, as before, and got into some trouble and became a victim of an attack. Therefore, the police, having no grounds for suspecting the family, left them alone. This family also seemed exemplary to them, and they began to look for the reason for the murder elsewhere. Meanwhile, the foster family continued to operate the home daycare. During the investigation, detectives also interrogated about 300 registered sex offenders in the area who could have been involved in sexually motivated attacks. But this did not allow them to obtain a single lead or even the slightest hint of what might have happened to the teenager. Most of them had alibis, and some no longer even lived in the area, so no suspects were identified from this list. On December 4, 2015, shoes likely belonging to Taylor were found 100 meters from where the body was discovered, as well as her backpack that the girl used to go to school. This story became so high profile that it attracted widespread public attention. It was broadcast on many TV channels in Australia, so gradually the whole country learned about this case. On the eve of Taylor's funeral, a series of pickets took place. Outraged citizens demanded the quickest possible solution to the horrific crime and the punishment of those responsible for the girl's gruesome death, which she clearly did not deserve. The victim's birth mother, being one of the organizers of the protests, persistently sought answers from the police regarding the circumstances of her daughter's death. She appeared on television, drawing the attention of the general public to this tragedy. The woman expressed indignation at the inaction of the Child Protection Services, to whom she had entrusted her child. It was largely thanks to her efforts that over 600 people came to the farewell ceremony for Taylor, which took place on November 14. Most of them had never met the girl during her lifetime, but felt the need to pay their respects. Many of those present were dressed in white and purple t-shirts with hearts and Taylor's name, as purple was her favorite color. About 400 white roses were placed on the coffin, and when the hearse drove off to the private cremation site, purple balloons were released into the sky. 5 months later, since the day of Taylor Palmer's murder, the investigation still had no significant breakthrough. In a desperate attempt to obtain any information that would help the investigation, a reward was announced. The sum of 250,000 Australian dollars, about $160,000, was intended to be an incentive for potential witnesses. The girl's mother appeared on television again, pleading for help. She urged eyewitnesses to come forward, and even the criminals themselves to confess. In addition to the financial reward, the police guaranteed immunity from prosecution for any accomplices who, while not being the direct perpetrator of the crime, would be the first to provide valuable information. However, even such unprecedented measures did not help shed light on the circumstances of Taylor's death. Although several calls were received from concerned citizens on the hotline, none of them contained useful information. The summer of 2016 passed, and the investigation still had not identified the main suspect. Investigators worked through one version after another, questioning individuals previously convicted of sexual crimes. However, due to the significant decomposition of the body at the time of its discovery, forensic experts were unable to find clues that would allow them to accurately determine the cause of the girl's death. The only more or less reasonable assumption was the guess about strangulation, as indicated by the fracture of the hyoid bone. The most likely scenario was considered to be Taylor's abduction by a random driver near the school, as the area where parents usually drop off their children was not in the view of surveillance cameras. Anything could have happened there. However, this was just one of many theories considered by law enforcement. The reward of $250,000 Australian dollars, promised to anyone who would provide information leading to the arrest of the killer, still remained unclaimed. And then, in May 2016, after exhausting months of fruitless work, an anonymous call containing valuable information was received by the state police line. The mysterious informant reported that he had information regarding Taylor and the Thornburn foster family, where the girl had ended up. According to him, the Thornburn couple had been looking for a troubled child from the very beginning in order to receive increased payments for her care. They had no other feelings for Taylor except mercenary interest. Moreover, the anonymous informant expressed a firm conviction that each member of the foster family could be involved, to some extent, in Taylor's tragic fate. Unfortunately, he ended the conversation at this point and did not get in touch again. Attempts to establish the identity of the mysterious Good Samaritan in order to obtain additional information from him were unsuccessful. However, this call prompted investigators to return to the version of the possible guilt of the foster family in the girl's death. After all, at the very beginning of the investigation, they had received signals from students about domestic violence in the Thornburn household. However, at that time, these testimonies could not be confirmed, so this line of investigation was temporarily abandoned. Now, however, the detectives decided to take a closer look at the victim's surroundings again. Trying to verify the words of the anonymous informant, law enforcement officers re-interviewed some of Taylor's classmates. One of the girl's close friends told about her confession of an intimate relationship with the younger of the Thornburn couple's sons, 19-year-old Trent, who was considered a real handsome man. Due to her age, Taylor did not fully understand the nature of this relationship, naively considering it a manifestation of romantic feelings, as Trent assured her. The girl had even managed to fall in love with him and was delighted with the horses that the family kept on the farm. At the same time, young Taylor was terribly afraid not only of Trent, but of his entire family, which is why she sought to escape from them by any means. It was suggested that in the Thornburn home, in addition to sexual abuse, there could also be brutal physical abuse of the foster child. These testimonies from the classmate undoubtedly required thorough verification. However, numerous repeated interrogations of family members yielded no results. Everyone, as one, continued to categorically deny the slightest suspicion of wrongdoing, especially sexual harassment of a minor. Nevertheless, given the seriousness of the accusations, the local authorities decided to temporarily suspend the Thornburns' license to operate a daycare center and also revoked the family's permission to care for foster children. Law enforcement officers installed listening devices in the suspect's house. Almost every day, they managed to record shocking details that completely destroyed the image of a respectable family that the Thornburns had so carefully cultivated. In particular, it became known that on October 29, 2015, just the day before the girl's disappearance, an emergency family meeting took place. During this meeting, Trent informed his parents about the suspicious abdominal pain that Taylor was complaining about. This caused the couple great concern and even suspicion about the possible pregnancy of their 12-year-old foster daughter. As it turned out, shortly before Taylor's disappearance, the Thornburns learned about the intimate relationship between the girl and their younger son, which took place when no one was home. According to Trent himself, recorded during the wiretapping, he repeatedly had sexual intercourse with his underage foster sister. This relationship lasted about 10 months, practically the entire period during which the girl was under the family's care. Eventually, when they suspected that Taylor might be pregnant, the 19-year-old young man turned to his parents. He was terribly afraid of possible publicity, as the 7-year age difference de facto made him a criminal. However, the head of the family, Rick, reassured his son, assuring him that he would take care of solving the problem himself. Judging by the overheard conversations, the girl was terrified of her foster father. More than anything in the world, she feared the prospect of being left alone with him. Apparently, these fears were not unfounded. The rest of the family members were also openly horrified by Rick, because under the mask of a respectable family man hid an extremely cruel and dangerous personality, which was later confirmed. The evening after the aforementioned meeting brought new horrific events. Rick, having driven all the household members out of the house except for his foster daughter, was left alone with her. When, as agreed, the rest of the family members returned a couple of hours later, the girl was nowhere to be found. When asked about her disappearance, the head of the family flatly stated that Taylor had run away and the problem with her was solved once and for all. "She definitely won't tell anyone anything now," he grimly summarized. A chilling guess flashed through the minds of the relatives had the father killed the girl, if he was so sure of her silence. When one of the brothers dared to check her room, Rick strictly forbade him to do so, threateningly stopping his son. None of the Thornburns even thought of contradicting the all-powerful head of the family, so everyone simply kept silent about the incident. Thus, the falsity of Rick's story about how he allegedly took his foster daughter to school, after which she disappeared, became obvious. The fact is that in reality, he physically could not have done this. At that point, Taylor was no longer in the house, and most likely, she was already dead. However, what exactly Rick had done to her remained a mystery even to the man's closest relatives. Thanks to the wiretapping of private conversations in the house, detectives repeatedly witnessed Rick instructing everyone on what to say and how to behave so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion from the police, and everyone obediently listened to his instructions. Law enforcement officers decided to begin interrogations with the couple's sons and their mother, rightly believing that they would be the easiest to break. And indeed, when investigators began to operate with the facts known to them, the interrogated gradually began to provide the necessary information. The longer the communication lasted, the clearer the terrifying picture of what was really happening behind the closed doors of the Thornburn home became. Everything indicated that Rick had arranged everything as if he was trying to protect his family. After carefully studying the footage from the outdoor surveillance cameras near the school, the police realized that the head of the family had gone to great lengths to disguise his crime and create a false alibi for the investigation. For example, on that fateful morning, he did drive in the direction of the school, and his car was captured by several cameras. But none of them recorded the girl getting out of the car. After these stunning revelations, the Thornburn family was hit by a barrage of accusations and public condemnation. Julie and George were accused of giving false testimony and deliberately misleading the investigation. Trent was accused of sexual violence against a minor, and Rick was charged with premeditated first-degree murder, an attempt to confuse the investigation. He had intentionally mutilated the victim's body so horribly to make it impossible for forensic experts and the police to confirm her identity. And this worked to some extent because at first, even the gender of the deceased could not be established. Fortunately, despite all efforts, it was impossible to completely exclude the possibility of identifying the body. Obviously, Rick was unaware of the existence of DNA analysis. In addition, law enforcement had strong reasons to suspect Rick of years of brutal physical and sexual abuse of all the children in the family, including his own. In total, at least 9 serious charges were brought against this monster in human form, and some of them did not even directly relate to the deceased girl. Trent was accused of debauchery and giving false testimony to the investigation. The family car, which, as it turned out, was hastily sold shortly after Taylor's disappearance, was taken from the new owner for a thorough inspection. Blood traces were found on it. These stunning events could not but affect Rick's health. On the day of his arrest, while in custody in a pre-trial detention center, he lost consciousness. The man's condition was so severe that doctors had to put him into an artificial coma. However, after a few days in the hospital, Rick regained consciousness. Medics suggested that he had deliberately provoked the exacerbation by taking some medications. Fortunately, this monster in human form failed to escape responsibility for the crimes committed. Eventually, all members of the Thornburn family appeared in court one by one. The cynicism and cruelty of their actions so shook the public that people literally craved reprisals against the entire family, capable of such inhuman brutality towards a defenseless girl. The evidence provided by the prosecution was so eloquent that the arguments of the defense were practically not taken seriously by the court. Julie and Joshua pleaded guilty on all counts and agreed to testify against Trent and Rick. The jury did not have to deliberate for long. They unanimously found all family members to be real monsters, guilty of various crimes. As a result, Joshua was sentenced to 3 months in prison. His mother received 1.5 years for false testimony. Trent, who also confessed to everything, was sent to prison for 4 years for incest, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Currently, the mother and sons are already at large. Trent, who repeatedly raped Taylor, was released from prison on January 19, 2018, having spent only 16 months there. The main sadist of this story, Rick, received the most severe punishment. During the trial, he confessed to the murder of Taylor, which he brutally committed in the barn, and the subsequent concealment of the girl's body in the river to save the reputation of his son and the entire family. In addition, the man was found guilty of a number of other serious crimes. In May 2018, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment with the right to parole no earlier than 20 years. The shocking details of this case caused not only a wave of public outrage and close media attention. The Australian legal system undertook a thorough revision of the legislation governing the principles of protecting children transferred to the care of foster families. As a result, a number of improvements were introduced aimed at strengthening control, especially in terms of identifying potential criminal elements among candidates for guardianship or persons who already have problems with the law. In addition, several new norms appeared concerning the care of minors with deviant behavior, as well as requirements for married couples applying for the adoption of such children. Rivers hide countless secrets in their depths. They conceal the chilling evidence of tragedies and crimes. This is exactly what the residents of a small town witnessed when, on one gloomy day, the waves washed ashore the body of a young teenage girl who literally had no face. Yes, you heard that right. This story took place in the small town of Warwicker, located in a remote southern region of Oklahoma, USA. It's a quiet place with a population of about 2,000 people, where everyone knows each other. Life here flows smoothly and unhurriedly. In the fall of 1996, one of the homes in Warwicker was occupied by the rich family, Gail the mother, Dwayne the father, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. Heather was not only an excellent student, but also a cheerleader. She had grown into a true beauty and attracted attention wherever she went. The girl had a kind nature, but was quite adventurous when it came to having fun. At 16, Heather was in her rebellious phase and wanted to try everything in life. On the evening of October 2, 1996, an argument arose between Heather and her mother over a $300 phone bill the girl had racked up chatting with her friends. Gail was upset by her daughter's wastefulness, while Dwayne took the situation more calmly. The thing was, the family was going through tough financial times. Heather's father, an electrician, had recently been severely injured in a transformer explosion. The man barely survived and required prolonged treatment and skin grafts. He couldn't work, so his wife had to take on an extra job to keep the family afloat. Every dollar counted, as expensive surgeries lay ahead for the father. The mother tried to explain to Heather that she couldn't afford to pay bills amounting to hundreds of dollars every month and to instill in her daughter respect for money, for elders, and the desire for independence. However, the teenage girl had a hard time accepting these admonitions, which led to a serious quarrel. When tempers cooled, Heather decided to go to bed. She went down to the living room, where she wished her father good night. Passing by her mother, the girl demonstratively remained silent, making it clear that she was still offended. On this sad note, all the family members retired to their rooms. The next morning, October 3rd, Gail, as usual, woke the children up for breakfast. But Heather didn't come out for a long time, and her mother attributed it to teenage resentment. The woman was sure that eventually hunger would force her daughter to come downstairs, despite her rebellious mood. But the girl never showed up. When Gail lost patience and went up to Heather's room, she was surprised to find no one there. Cell phones were not so common back then, so Heather didn't have one. The worried parents called all of their daughter's girlfriends, but none of them knew where she might be. Such behavior was completely unlike Heather. She had no mental issues and had never run away from home before. Moreover, the girl always took great care of her appearance and was unlikely to go anywhere for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. Gail and Dwayne wasted no time and headed to the sheriff's office in Waurika to report their daughter missing. The mother told about yesterday's argument with Heather, during which the woman reproached the girl for the huge phone bill and the stubbornness with which she refused to admit her guilt. The parents felt that their daughter's endless chats with her friends were going beyond reason, and although Dwayne was generally calmer, he supported his wife on this matter. The sheriff tried to reassure the worried parents, assuring them that the girl had probably just run away from home, as teenagers often do, especially after a fight with their parents. But Gail and Dwayne knew this was out of character for their daughter. Heather usually didn't run from problems but tried to find a compromise, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time the mother's fiery reaction and the girl's lack of restraint, who couldn't admit her mistake, led to an unfortunate situation. Despite the parents' concerns, law enforcement officials assured them that most such situations resolve themselves. Teenagers who have run away from home usually come to their senses quickly and return to their families. It was quite possible that while Gail and Dwayne were at the sheriff's office, their daughter was already back home. The officers tried to reassure the worried mother and father, assuring them that everything would be fine. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day must pass without any contact. Since the specified time had not yet elapsed, the police could not accept the statement and sent the couple home to wait for news from Heather. Disappointed by the attitude of law enforcement, Gail and Dwayne felt that something had happened to their daughter and decided to start their own search in town. First of all, they decided to talk to the girl's closest circle and contacted several of her friends. Among them was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team, whom Heather had previously dated. Although their romantic relationship quickly ended, the young people remained friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had recently run up a huge phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl called the boy, he said he had no idea about Heather's whereabouts or what could have happened to her. Despite his seemingly convincing tone, Gail felt that Randy was hiding something. He seemed to be repeating a rehearsed story, like a robot, and wasn't at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which seemed suspicious. However, Randy could not be caught in a lie, so Heather's mother decided to contact another friend of her daughter, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell, whom she had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother picked up the phone. She said that the boy was resting after a party and she didn't want to wake him up. The elderly woman categorically refused to call her grandson to the phone and admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in the yard where the school children had been partying the night before. When Gail asked about Heather, the grandmother replied that she hadn't seen the girl. Having received no useful information, the worried parents drove all over the county in search of at least some clues about their daughter's whereabouts. A day passed, but all efforts were in vain, so Gail and Dwayne went to the police station again. This time, law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week passed, but no valuable information about the missing schoolgirl appeared. Given the time frame, hope of finding the girl alive was fading with each passing day. Later, while examining the outskirts on the border with Texas, police patrols noticed a body in the river, floating face down. It was half submerged in the muddy water, but people on the bridge noticed it. The skin of the unknown victim was covered with a thick layer of dirt, as if intentionally to make the body harder to see. When divers managed to pull the gruesome find ashore, something much more terrifying was revealed under the layer of mud. The mutilated victim had numerous traces of buckshot, indicating a point-blank shooting, probably from a shotgun. The face was so disfigured that it seemed impossible to identify the deceased at first glance. A forensic examination was needed. As a result of the investigation, experts established that the victim had been shot 9 times from close range, once in the back of the head and 8 times in the back. The body was literally torn to pieces and was in a terrible condition. Since only one person was listed as missing in the area at that time, Heather Rich's parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter only by the engraved name ring given to the girl by her mother. This dispelled any doubts. It was Heather lying on the morgue table. The identity of the deceased was finally confirmed by dental records, as forensic experts found non-removable braces in the oral cavity of the mutilated body, which the schoolgirl wore to correct her bite. The news of the young cheerleader's death spread like wildfire through the town and became the main topic of discussion the very next day. Within a few hours, all the local residents knew about the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also found out about it, for whom the day when it all happened coincided with the annual match where he had been recognized as the king of the game for several seasons in a row. Usually, after such competitions, loud celebrations were held. But this time there was no room for fun. The boy was shocked by the terrible news about his ex-girlfriend and later went to the same bridge where the body was found. He stared into the murky waters for a long time, hiding a terrible secret from everyone. In fact, Randy knew much more than he told the parents of the deceased, and soon the investigation led the police to the boy and several of his friends. These events resembled the plot of a terrifying Hollywood horror movie. In the very heart of a small town in Oklahoma, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary evening into a bloody massacre. One of them was from a wealthy family. The second was a star of school football and the team captain, and the third was a novice street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the investigation, they first spoke with Heather's parents. By that time, Gail had already managed to call quite a few of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. Her suspicions fell on 2 young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Wood, and her current boyfriend Josh Bagwell, who had arrived from a party and didn't even bother to call. The woman was convinced that the boys were hiding something. It seemed that the high school students were telling the same rehearsed story, with even the wording of sentences coinciding in places. However, they could not give a clear answer to additional questions, which seemed extremely strange. Noticeably nervous, the teenagers were reluctant to make contact, unlike Heather's other friends who actively joined in her search. Gail intuitively felt that Randy and Josh knew much more than they were saying in their telephone excuses. Talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, investigators received several leads indicating that Josh and Randy had information about the events of that fateful night when the girl ran away from home after an argument with her mother. Later it turned out that Heather had indeed intended to go to a party to meet her boyfriend Josh. Despite her parents' ban on leaving the house late in the evening, this did not stop the rebellious schoolgirl. After waiting for Gail and Dwayne to fall asleep, she jumped out the window around 11 p.m. There, those same 2 suspicious young men, well known in the city and popular among local youth, were supposed to be waiting for her. Josh was considered a rich heir to wealthy parents. He always drove the coolest cars and wore the most stylish clothes, willingly demonstrating his family's wealth. This boy was a typical representative of the golden youth, who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast, Randy Wood came from a simple family, but thanks to his talent and perseverance in sports, he gained no less fame than his wealthy friend. Friends adored the handsome team captain for his virtuoso play on the field. For his merits, he became the best football player not only in the school but in the whole city, and even gained popularity among school teams at the state level. Randy and Josh were inseparable and usually spent their weekends driving around in Josh's car on dirt roads. Of course, girls could often be seen in their company. The boys regularly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked marijuana. Due to the lack of entertainment facilities for young people in the town, the teenagers simply had nothing to do, so they improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often spent time with this company. A friend said that the girl had also tried weed and alcohol with them, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away to hang out with the popular boys. This news shocked the parents of the 16-year-old straighter student who had taken such a slippery path. Although the couple was aware of their daughter's propensity for risky experiments, they had no idea that this was happening in the company of young men. As it turned out, 5 days before the disappearance, on September 27, 1996, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in a corner of the stadium. Marijuana and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known about alcohol consumption. Because of this incident, the schoolgirls were suspended from classes for 3 days. The teachers informed Gail and Dwayne about everything, and they did not hide their indignation, as they never expected their 16-year-old daughter to get involved in such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried the prohibited substances out of curiosity and promised to stop. However, the parents were more concerned about something else: why a diligent student and athlete had taken this wrong path at all. The young girl's attraction to alcohol and drugs was frightening. Despite their daughter's assurances that she would give up her bad habits, Gail and Dwayne were never able to verify her sincerity. Instead, these harmful passions probably had a direct relation to her death. The detectives decided to talk to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was last seen. They hoped to find out the details of the party that preceded Heather's disappearance. The captain of the football team admitted that he and his friend were in a trailer behind Josh's house, playing dominoes and drinking all evening. However, both boys denied any contact with Heather that ill-fated evening. Interestingly, the police noticed the same details that had alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both young men told exactly the same story, as if reciting a memorized text, and spoke mechanically, like robots. Moreover, they showed practically no emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. Such behavior convinced law enforcement officers that the teenagers were lying. They suspected that the murder could have happened out of jealousy when the young men couldn't share the girl between them. Of course, at that point, the investigators did not yet have strong evidence that would directly link the high school students to the crime. However, the strange behavior of Randy and Josh reinforced the police's doubts about their possible involvement. Both ended up as the main suspect, so it was necessary to study their biographies, relationships with Heather, and the circumstances of the party that took place on the eve of her disappearance more carefully. The autopsy results provided new food for thought. First of all, attention was drawn to the number of shots, as many as 9. Even police shotguns usually hold 8 rounds in the magazine. Why would someone reload the weapon to fire an additional shot when the victim was obviously already dead? Another interesting detail was the type of ammunition used, the so-called double buckshot. These powerful cartridges have excessive lethal force for executing a 16-year-old girl. Fortunately, such a specific choice by the criminal helped the investigation make its first serious breakthrough. These rare rounds were sold in only one store in the city. After checking the receipts, the police found out that only one person had purchased them shortly before the murder. The seller recognized in the photo the very suspected young man, high school student Josh Bagwell, who had come to the store and bought a whole box, that is, 20 rounds. According to the store employee, another young man was with Josh, but not his best friend Randy, but a certain Curtis Gamble, a guy well known to the local police. As it turned out, Curtis was the oldest among those involved in the case. He was already 19. Despite his young age, he had already been arrested several times and had spent most of his conscious life in juvenile detention centers. This guy was completely inadequate and had repeatedly come to the attention of law enforcement. He was caught drunk driving, shooting his gun at dogs, horses, or even random passers-by. Therefore, Curtis himself fell under the greatest suspicion, unlike the other 2 young men who, although they behaved strangely, had never had problems with the law before and had never been considered aggressive or dangerous. On October 23rd, the police visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important was the fact that just a few kilometers from his home was the same bridge under which the fishermen stumbled upon the mutilated body. Curtis himself was not found at home, but the law enforcement officers spoke with his grandmother. The woman told about her grandson and, among other things, mentioned that he knew the area well and often visited the bridge in question. Curtis had loved to fish there since he was a kid, and the elderly woman had taken him with her more than once. So it turned out that the boy had a much closer connection with the crime scene than the police could have assumed before talking to his grandmother. The next day, the detectives managed to meet with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted more than 8 hours, but the suspect essentially did not say anything, although he agreed to take a polygraph test. But even this did not become the main find of the investigators. Curtis's most valuable confession concerned his possession of a rather rare type of firearm, a Mossberg shotgun, a special feature of which is a magazine for 9 rounds. Thus, the detectives suggested that they had stumbled upon the owner of the likely murder weapon, as Heather had been shot with that very type of gun. When the weapon was seized and a ballistic examination was assigned, experts officially confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with Curtis's shotgun. After being presented with evidence of his involvement in the murder of the young cheerleader, the boy gave in. He told the police that he had dragged 2 of his friends, Randy and Josh, into this crime, after which he wrote a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement finally had a suspect who had confessed to the crime. Given the likely complicity of the other young men, Randy and Josh were also arrested and brought to the station. The schoolboys were shown Curtis's testimony, where he claimed that he himself had initiated the massacre of the girl, but Randy had become the direct perpetrator. According to the confessor, he had given his shotgun to his friend and ordered him to shoot the innocent victim, while Josh had simply been present. However, the police were skeptical about this testimony, since the football team captain did not fit the image of a typical criminal. In the past, the young man had never had any problems with the law, had been an exemplary student and a successful athlete, popular among his peers. No one had ever spoken badly of him. Considering the geography of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the body was found in Texas. The boys faced trial in this particular state, where the death penalty is prescribed for murder. This became a key problem for the investigation, as under local laws, the actual perpetrator could end up in the dock. Therefore, none of the suspects wanted to take the blame for the fatal shot. Only after persistent attempts by the police and a second meeting with the investigators did Randy finally begin to testify. However, he categorically denied his direct participation in the murder, claiming that Curtis had been the shooter and the initiator of the massacre of Heather, and Josh had simply helped him. For his part, Josh refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Thus, in October 1996, the detectives received two confessions that contradicted each other in many aspects. In the end, the investigators concluded that Randy's testimony seemed more truthful, and he had also successfully passed a lie detector test. It became clear that it would hardly be possible to establish the exact sequence of events on the fateful evening of October 2nd with 100% certainty, but it was decided to rely on the information provided by the football team captain. According to his confessions, that day Randy had planned to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh. When they gathered, it turned out that Heather was supposed to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy himself well, but had never met Curtis before, so she had no idea how dangerous a guy he was. When all four of them got together and had a good drink, Heather, like the rest of the company, found herself on the verge of losing consciousness. It was at this moment that Curtis, drunk, got the idea to take advantage of the girl's helpless state and abuse her. He immediately proceeded to act. As Randy recounted, Heather woke up from the harassment and screamed, pushing the attacker away, and then fainted again. Despite the fact that she could barely move her tongue, Curtis got scared because even a half-drunk victim could remember everything when she sobered up. He knew very well that rapes are met with an unfriendly reception in prison, and he did not want to end up behind bars because of this incident. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of the girl. The younger boys initially took these words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the trunk of his car and pointed it at the three teenagers. Randy and Josh realized that they were dealing with an extremely unpredictable guy, so they decided not to argue. They loaded the helpless schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's car, and the whole company headed towards Curtis's house. But a few kilometers from the destination, the older boy ordered them to turn to the bridge where the victim's body was later found. Curtis forced his friends to stop in the middle of the bridge, get Heather out of the trunk, and put her by the railing. Fearing for their own lives, Randy and Josh obeyed. When the unconscious girl was pulled out of the car, she could not stand on her feet. The young men laid her on the ground and sat down in the car, not imagining what would happen next. Curtis walked right up to the helpless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy saw with his own eyes how a huge hole formed in his classmate's skull. He could not stand the gruesome sight, covered his face with his hands, and was afraid to even look in that direction. The attacker emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim, after which he and Josh threw the girl's mutilated body off the bridge. Getting into the car, the boys fled the crime scene. They saw with their own eyes what Curtis had done to Heather, so fear for their own lives made them keep silent. In October 1996, the three young men were officially charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Ridge. The investigators had the hardest time working with Josh Bagwell, who refused to testify and against whom, in fact, there was no direct evidence of involvement. The prosecution had to rely solely on the words of the other two defendants in the case, which contradicted each other. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the evidence base was not very reliable. To remedy this situation, the prosecutor offered Randy Wood a deal with the investigation. In exchange for testimony against Josh, the young man was promised life imprisonment with the right to parole after 30 years. Randy immediately agreed. The prosecutor's office also discussed with Heather's parents the possibility of a similar sentence for Curtis. In the opinion of the victim's family, the most important thing was to get truthful testimony from him, and not to send the underage organizer of the murder to the death penalty. The Rich family first and foremost wanted to know the truth. On October 15th, Curtis accepted the prosecution's offer and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. At the same time, during the trial, he continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. While in custody awaiting trial, Curtis once attacked a guard, knocked him down, and began to strangle him. The enraged prisoner was subdued only by the joint efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case had gained such notoriety that there were so many people eager to attend the hearing. In the end, access to the courtroom was restricted, with both random spectators and members of the press barred from being present. The defenders of the accused resorted to various attempts to justify their clients. In fact, the lawyers tried to tarnish the reputation of Heather herself, portraying her as an alcoholic and a loose woman who had allegedly entered into an intimate relationship with Curtis herself and then began to threaten him with exposure, forcing the boy to resort to drastic measures. The parents had to defend the honor and dignity of their daughter. In reality, the girl was a diligent student, a talented athlete, and an extremely decent person who simply found herself in the wrong company and encountered a real criminal. The floor was given to Curtis. To the surprise of those present, he suddenly returned to his initial version of events, claiming that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and had not even been aware of the murder plans. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy who had fired the fatal shot. This testimony deeply affected Randy. Unexpectedly for everyone, the football team captain took a desperate step. He refused the plea bargain. The young man did not want his confession to be regarded as dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing his accomplices right in the courtroom, Randy stated that he primarily wanted to achieve justice for the innocently murdered girl. This decision went against even the advice of the defendant's lawyer. Despite all the nobility of this act, Randy consciously risked ending up on death row. It was this selfless behavior of the young man that made a strong impression on Heather's parents. The couple even personally met with Randy after the court session. Such a bold and principled step was of great importance to the family of the deceased. On February 10th, Wood appeared before the jury and told the whole truth about the terrible events of that fateful evening. His testimony left no doubt. The young man described in detail the full participation of Josh and Curtis in the murder of Heather, as well as Bagwell's role in concealing the traces of the crime. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional commission of this particularly serious crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional term of 99 years. In May 1998, a meeting took place between Heather's parents and Randy as part of a live television talk show. Despite all the pain and sorrow of losing their daughter, the rich couple expressed sincere admiration for the honesty and deep remorse of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the trial of Randy Wood was concluded. He was also found guilty of involvement in the murder. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years. This decision saddened many people because Wood was the only one of the 3 defendants in the case who sincerely repented of what he had done and, risking his own life, decided to bring the truth to the jury. The prevailing opinion in society was that the boy did not deserve such a severe punishment. Josh Bagwell also suffered the fate of life imprisonment without the right to early release. He was sent to serve his sentence in the same correctional facility as Curtis. In January 2002, both convicts made a daring escape attempt, taking advantage of the night. They managed to hide in the state of Texas for 10 days. A nationwide search was announced. Eventually, the fugitives were caught and returned behind bars to continue serving their life sentences.